They called her cursed before she could even breathe her first word. Born beneath a blood moon, Lydia carried a secret no one dared to name. While others shifted under silver light, bones breaking, wolves howling in triumph, she remained human, trembling, powerless. In a world where strength was everything, weakness was a death sentence. On the night of her rejection, the pack gathered to watch her shame. The Alpha's eyes were cold, his verdict absolute. She was unfit, unwanted, cast aside before her destiny could even awaken. But what no one saw was the shadow moving behind her eyes, the whisper curling in her blood. She wasn't cursed at all. She was chosen. And when the truth broke free, every wolf who mocked her would kneel or burn. The clearing pulsed with energy beneath the swollen moon, a place carved from the heart of the forest, where generations of wolves had celebrated their first shift. Torches ringed the sacred ground, throwing firelight onto faces hungry for spectacle. Lydia stood at the center, her bare feet pressed into damp earth, her hands trembling despite her effort to hide it. Around her, whispers threaded through the crowd like venom, soft enough to sting, but loud enough to echo. She won't shift, cursed girl. She's already failed. The words clung to her like chains, dragging her further into the pit of fear that had lived inside her since childhood. She tried to steady her breathing, focusing on the cool night air, the weight of expectation pressing in from all sides. Tonight was supposed to be her triumph, her chance to prove that she belonged. Her packmates had already shifted, glorious in fur and fang, their wolves bowing proudly before the Alpha. Lydia should have been next, should have felt the fire in her bones, the breaking and rebuilding that marked the birth of a true wolf. Instead, she felt only silence. Empty, hollow, silence where her wolf should have answered. The Alpha, broad-shouldered and merciless, stepped forward, his voice carried like a blade across the clearing. Shift. One command. One chance. Lydia shut her eyes, straining with every part of her soul, begging her wolf to rise. Pain sparked through her body, bones threatening to crack, her breath coming in broken gasps. She dropped to her knees, fingers clawing into the dirt as if sheer will could drag the beast out. For one heartbeat, hope surged, a flicker of something moving in her blood, a shadow just out of reach. But then, just as quickly, it vanished. The silence returned, crushing and absolute. When she looked up, faces stared back with cruel delight. The Alpha's jaw tightened, his disappointment carved into stone. He didn't need to say the words, but he did, his voice carrying through the night. You are no wolf, you are nothing. Gasps rippled, and Lydia's chest caved out under the weight of humiliation. The pack, her family, the only world she'd ever known, looked at her, not as one of them, but as a mistake. And from the shadows beyond the torches, something else was watching, something that did not laugh, something that whispered her name. The rejection begins, but Lydia feels an unseen presence stirring as the Alpha prepares to make his final judgment.
The Alpha's gaze was like ice, sharp enough to pierce through skin and bone. He stood before her in full dominance, his wolf shimmering just beneath the surface of his human form, power radiating off him in waves that made the crowd bow their heads. Lydia remained on her knees, dirt caked to her palms, breath ragged from the effort of trying to shift. She wanted to beg, to plead for another chance, but the words lodged in her throat like stones. Her silence only deepened his contempt. "Stand," he ordered. His voice cracked across her body like a whip. With trembling legs she rose, refusing to look away even as her vision blurred with unshed tears. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw softness in his eyes, an echo of the nights they had spent speaking in hushed tones, when she still believed the bond between them might be real. But it vanished like smoke. In its place was nothing but judgment. "You are weak, a disgrace to this pack." His voice carried for all to hear, each word a lash that left her raw. I cannot claim a mate who cannot even summon her wolf. The bond ends tonight. Gasps rippled through the assembly, some sharp with shock, others low with cruel satisfaction. Lydia's chest hollowed out as the rejection tore through her body like fire. The bond, fragile but constant, snapped in two. Pain spread through her veins, searing, suffocating, dragging a cry from her lips before she could silence it. She bent forward, clutching her chest, but no one moved to help her. The Alpha turned his back, dismissing her as though she had never mattered. From this night on, Lydia of the Blood Fang Pack is nothing. No mate, no wolf, no place here. His words sealed her fate, final and merciless. The crowd parted as he walked away, leaving her stranded in the center of the circle, a broken shadow beneath the merciless moon. Their eyes bored into her, some with pity, most with scorn, but none dared step closer. And in the hush that followed his decree, Lydia swore she felt it again, a brush of something cold and ancient stirring inside her blood, as if the bond snapping had freed something darker that was never meant to sleep.
The clearing emptied slowly, like a theater after a play's final act. One by one, the pack drifted away, their whispers lingering in the air long after their footsteps faded into the trees. Lydia stayed where she was, her knees digging into the cold soil, her body too heavy to lift. The rejection still burned through her chest, raw and relentless, like a wound that would never close. Her heart throbbed with each cruel word the Alpha had spoken, carved into her memory as if etched by fire. She told herself not to cry. Tears only proved their point, but the salt stung her lips all the same. The torches sputtered low, and the sacred clearings seemed to shrink around her. Without the pack's heat and voices, it felt like a graveyard, the silence deep and suffocating. She stared at the spot where he had stood, remembering how once she had dreamed of standing proudly at his side. She had believed in him, in their bond, even when the pack called her cursed. That hope was gone now, trampled beneath his words, and in its place was a bitter hollowness that clawed at her ribs. When she finally pushed herself upright, her legs wobbled like brittle branches. The forest loomed around her, vast and unfriendly. Shadows stretched long between the trees, moving in ways that didn't match the torchlight's flicker. The air carried a chill that seemed to curl around her bones, whispering at the edge of hearing. She paused, straining to listen, her heart pounding louder than her breath. For a moment, she thought she heard her name carried on the wind, soft, drawn out, not in the Alpha's voice, but something older, darker. Fear skittered up her spine, but strangely, so did a pull. The sound didn't feel like danger alone, it felt like recognition, as if something hidden had finally noticed her. She turned toward the tree line, the night dense with shadows, and for the first time since her rejection, her tears stilled, because somewhere out there in the dark, something was waiting for her, and it knew her better than anyone ever had. By morning, the news had spread like wildfire. Wolves from every corner of the territory carried the story in their whispers, and Lydia couldn't step outside the narrow shack she called home without feeling their eyes crawl over her. Some looked at her with thinly veiled pity, but most did not bother to hide their contempt. They smirked when she passed, muttered "cursed" under their breath, and stepped aside as though her very shadow carried sickness. She tried to hold her head high, but the weight of their mockery dragged it down. At the well, 2 young she-wolves laughed loudly, pretending not to notice her, while their voices carried sharp enough for her to hear. I heard she begged the Alpha to reconsider, on her knees like a dog. Another snickered. Didn't matter, no wolf inside her, just skin and bone. Their laughter rang like a bell of cruelty, and Lydia's hands shook so violently she nearly dropped her bucket. She wanted to scream that they were wrong, that she wasn't nothing, but her throat locked and the words withered before they could rise. Even the elders who once gave her kind smiles when she was a child avoided her now. They crossed to the other side of the path, eyes averted, as if she carried a curse that could leap from them to her. The rejection had not only severed her bond with the Alpha, it had severed her from the pack itself. She had become untethered, unwanted, invisible except for when they wanted to sneer. Her chest ached with every glance that sliced her open, and still she kept walking, each step heavier than the last. That night, when she returned to her empty shack, the silence pressed close again. She lit no fire, for what warmth could a flame give to someone already dead inside? Lying awake on the straw pallet, she stared at the ceiling until her eyes burned. The words of the Alpha echoed endlessly in her skull. No mate, no wolf, no place here. She closed her eyes, praying for sleep to steal her away. But instead, the whispers returned, softer this time, insistent. They slithered through the cracks of her mind, curling around her thoughts like smoke, until she swore she felt something cold brush across her cheek in the dark.
Sleep finally claimed her, but it did not bring peace. The moment her eyes fluttered shut, the world shifted. She was no longer in her shack, but standing barefoot on cold stone, surrounded by darkness that stretched infinitely. A silver mist clung to the ground, curling around her ankles, and the air was thick with the scent of iron and ash. She turned in circles, searching for light, for direction, but the only illumination came from a faint crimson glow on the horizon, pulsing like a heartbeat. Then she heard it again. Her name, whispered low and drawn out, as if spoken from the bottom of a grave. Lydia. The sound wrapped around her spine, both chilling and strangely familiar. She covered her ears, but the whisper was inside her, echoing through her blood. Fear surged, but so did a strange pull, a recognition that froze her in place. She should have run, she should have screamed, yet her feet carried her forward, drawn toward the glow. The mist thickened as she walked, shapes forming in its shifting veil. Faces appeared, hollow-eyed and gaunt, their mouths open in silent screams. She stumbled back, heart slamming against her ribs, but the shadows followed, reaching for her with skeletal hands. Her breath came in ragged gasps as their touch grazed her skin, cold, searing, impossible. Then a figure emerged from the mist, taller than the rest, cloaked in black, with eyes that burned like dying embers. He raised a hand, and the whispers ceased, the silence more suffocating than the noise. When he spoke, his voice was not one but many, layered and ancient. Blood of Nightfang, the curse is breaking. Lydia froze, her mind reeling at the name, Nightfang, the royal pack destroyed generations ago, its bloodline erased. She opened her mouth to demand answers, but the figure reached out, pressing a cold hand against her chest. A surge of power shot through her veins, tearing a cry from her throat. The dream shattered, and she woke in her shack, gasping, clutching her heart as if it still burned. But the name lingered on her lips like a brand, impossible to forget. Nightfang. The next day dawned gray, the sun smothered by heavy clouds that seemed to mirror the weight pressing down on her chest. Lydia dragged herself through the motions of gathering water and splitting firewood, but her body felt foreign, her mind still tethered to the dream. The name Nightfang echoed in her head with every heartbeat, stirring questions she had no way to answer. The more she tried to push it aside, the stronger it clung, as if whispering that her rejection had unlocked something long buried. Her solitude did not last. By mid-morning, a sharp knock rattled the door of her shack. Startled, she froze, clutching the wooden handle of the bucket in her hand. The
The door creaked open before she could move, and there he was, the Alpha, framed by the stormy light, his presence filling the tiny space like a blade cutting through air. His eyes were cold, unreadable, yet there was something beneath them she couldn't name, something sharper than disdain. "You will stay away from the pack grounds," he said, without preamble, his voice low and edged. "You are no longer one of us, and you will not be seen among us again." Lydia's throat tightened. She wanted to demand why he had come himself, why he hadn't sent a warrior to deliver his warning. But his gaze pinned her in place, and the words never rose. He leaned closer, the scent of his wolf brushing against her senses, and for one breath she swore he saw unease flicker in his eyes. "You should leave these lands entirely," he added, softer now, as though the words cost him. "There are things that watch in the dark, and whatever they want, they will find you first." With that, he turned and was gone, the door slamming shut behind him. Lydia stood frozen in the silence he left behind, her pulse thundering. It wasn't just rejection driving him to cast her out. There was something more. He had seen it too. The shadows. And if the Alpha feared them, then whatever waited for her in the dark was far worse than she dared to imagine.
The Alpha's warning echoed in Lydia's ears long after he left, a bitter aftertaste clinging to every breath she took. She knew the truth. She had no choice but to leave. Remaining meant facing endless scorn, whispers behind her back, and eyes that branded her useless. But leaving meant stepping into the unknown, stripped of her pack's protection. For an Omega, exile was a death sentence. Still, the decision was made for her when a group of warriors arrived at dusk. Their faces were impassive, their voices flat as they delivered the Alpha's command. She was to leave the pack by dawn. They didn't call her by name. They didn't offer pity. One even tossed her meager belongings onto the dirt like scraps. His mouth curled in disdain. Lydia gathered them silently, fingers trembling as she shoved clothing and a chipped water jug into a threadbare sack. No one came to see her off. No one whispered farewell. By nightfall, she stood at the edge of the pack's borders, the familiar forest stretching before her like a stranger's land. Behind her, laughter and the glow of fires painted a picture of belonging she no longer had claim to. For a long moment she hesitated, her chest heavy with the ache of all she was leaving. Every memory she had, her childhood, her first crush, her stolen hopes, was tied to this land. And now it was denied her. She pressed her palm against the invisible line of the border, a final gesture of farewell, before stepping across. The air seemed to shift instantly, colder, wilder, carrying the weight of eyes unseen. With each step deeper into exile, the whispers returned, soft and steady, winding through the trees. They didn't mock, they didn't scorn, they welcomed. By the time the moon crested high above, Lydia realized she was no longer walking into emptiness. She was walking into something that had been waiting.
The forest at night was alive with sound. The rustle of unseen creatures, the cry of an owl, the distant trickle of water. But beneath it all, Lydia heard the whispers, threading through the noise like a secret melody. Her heart raced, every instinct warning her to run, yet her feet carried her deeper, drawn to the voice that had haunted her since the rejection. It wasn't like the jeers of her pack. This voice was older, steadier, and though it chilled her to the bone, it also soothed, like a forgotten lullaby. The trees grew denser as she wandered, their branches curling overhead until the sky disappeared. The ground dipped suddenly, and she stumbled into a clearing bathed in pale light. At its center stood a crumbling stone altar, cracked and overgrown with moss. Symbols were etched into its surface, wolf sigils, moons, and something else she couldn't decipher, all carved deep as though meant to last centuries. Her breath caught. She had heard whispers of such places in stories told to frighten pups. remnants of the Night Fangs, the lost royal pack. No one spoke of them openly anymore, not since their fall. Drawn closer, she brushed her fingers over the carvings. The stone pulsed faintly beneath her touch, a vibration that thrummed through her bones. She yanked her hand back, but the whispers grew louder, swirling around her until they merged into a single word: blood. She staggered, her heart pounding, but the voice pressed on, firmer now: Night Fang. Her knees weakened, and she dropped against the altar, clutching its cold edge. The name from her dream echoed here, carved in stone and whispered by the forest itself. She didn't know what it meant, not yet, but she knew one thing: her exile wasn't the end, it was the beginning. And whatever shadow tied her to the name Night Fang was closer than it had ever been.
The days blurred into nights as Lydia wandered beyond the borders, the forest becoming both her prison and her only companion. She learned quickly how unforgiving exile could be. Hunger clawed at her belly, sharp and merciless. The berries she gathered left her weak, and the streams she drank from never seemed to quench the gnawing emptiness inside. At night, when she huddled beneath twisted roots or caves, the whispers returned. They slithered across her mind like a second heartbeat, low and steady. At first, she resisted. She pressed her hands against her ears, whispered prayers to the moon goddess, begged for silence, but the voice did not relent. It coaxed. It promised. You are more than this. You are not weak. You are mine. Those words sank deeper than any cruelty the pack had ever spat at her. For the first time, someone, or something, was not mocking her failure. It was claiming her. Hunger made her reckless. One evening, she stumbled upon the scent of deer. Her stomach twisted painfully, driving her into the underbrush. She followed the trail until she caught sight of it grazing in a moonlit glade. The sight made her mouth water, her instincts roaring even without a wolf to guide her. She lunged clumsily, desperate, but fell hard into the dirt. The deer bolted, leaving her gasping, humiliated. That was when the whispers surged, filling her skull until she thought she would break. Let me in, and I will feed you. Something shifted inside her then, a cold tide rising to meet her desperation. Her hands shook violently, and for a heartbeat, her reflection shimmered in the stream nearby. Not her face, but something darker, eyes burning faintly red. She stumbled back, clutching her chest, breath ragged, as the whispers laughed softly, knowing she had felt it too.
The altar called her back. No matter how far she strayed, she always seemed to find herself circling toward it, as though the forest itself guided her steps. The second time she approached, it was different. The moss-covered stone seemed brighter, the carvings clearer, as if responding to her presence. She traced one symbol, a crescent moon crossed by jagged lines, and heat seared her fingertips. Beneath the pain came visions, sudden and vivid. She saw wolves cloaked in black fur, their eyes gleaming silver, standing before the altar in reverence. She saw a woman with hair like midnight, her arms lifted to the blood moon, chanting words Lydia could not understand. Then came fire, screams, and blood pooling across stone. The vision shattered, leaving Lydia sprawled on the ground, her body trembling as though she had lived it herself. Panting, she clutched the altar for support. The whispers surged again, no longer fragmented, but almost clear. You carry their blood, the blood they feared, the blood they hunted. She shook her head in denial. She was no royal, no heir. She was nothing, rejected, cast out, forgotten. But the altar disagreed, the carvings glowing faintly beneath her touch, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. The air shifted, and for a moment she felt watched, not by eyes of flesh, but by something deeper, older, woven into the stones. She wanted to run, but her body refused. Instead, she whispered aloud, her voice raw. "What are you?" The forest stilled, as if listening. Then, from the shadows, came the answer, soft but undeniable. "You are ours."
By the third week of exile, Lydia was gaunt, her body aching from endless wandering. Yet something inside her was stronger. Each night the whispers grew clearer, and with them came flickers of strength she'd never known. A sharpened sense of smell, a steadier stride, a strange awareness of shadows curling close to her. But exile's dangers were not only whispers. It was near dusk when she caught the scent of wolves on the wind. Her body froze, every instinct screaming danger. She crouched low as figures emerged from the trees, men and women in dark leather, bearing the mark of a rival pack on their shoulders. At their center strode an alpha, taller than the rest, his aura sharp enough to slice through the clearing. His eyes locked onto hers immediately, and she felt pinned like prey beneath a predator's gaze. "What's this?" His voice was smooth, dangerous, edged with curiosity. An omega wandering alone beyond her borders? His warriors chuckled, circling her like vultures. Lydia braced herself, expecting scorn, maybe even death. But the alpha's eyes narrowed as if he saw something more. He stepped closer, inhaling deeply, and for a heartbeat, his expression flickered. Recognition. "You smell wrong. Not weak, not quite wolf. What are you?" The questions sank like claws into her chest. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, the whispers surged inside her. "He sees. He knows. He is not yours." Panic flared. She stumbled back, clutching her sack, but the alpha only smirked, a predator savoring his discovery. "This forest isn't safe for strays. But I think you're worth watching."
The encounter left her shaken, but it was only the beginning. That night, Lydia found herself back at the altar, her chest heaving, her mind a storm. She couldn't shake the rival alpha's gaze, the way he had looked at her as though he saw beneath her skin. Exhaustion weighed her down, yet the whispers would not let her rest. They pressed harder, urgent, demanding, "Let us in, let us rise." She clutched her head, falling to her knees before the altar. The hunger returned, sharper than ever, gnawing her from the inside out. Her vision blurred, her body racked with tremors, as if her blood itself burned. Then, from the forest's edge, came movement. Wolves, real wolves this time, emerged, eyes glinting in the moonlight, wild, snarling, drawn to her scent. Lydia's pulse skyrocketed as they closed in. She had no wolf, no claws, no strength to fight them. Desperation clawed at her chest and she screamed, the sound tearing from her throat, raw and wild. The shadows answered. They surged from the ground like smoke-made flesh, wrapping around the wolves. The beasts yelped, clawing at air as the darkness pierced them, twisting and tearing. Blood sprayed across the altar stones, and when the last wolf fell silent, the clearing reeked of iron and death. Lydia knelt among the bodies, trembling, her hands stained red. The whispers hummed in triumph, satisfied. Her chest rose and fell in shallow gasps as realization dawned. She had no wolf because she was never meant to shift like them. Her power was something darker, something that had just awakened, and the forest itself seemed to bow to her in silence.
The forest felt alive at night, as though every tree leaned closer to listen to her breathing. Lydia trudged deeper into exile, the pack's rejection still a raw wound in her chest. Yet the silence was never true silence anymore. Whispers threaded through the shadows, voices that were neither male nor female, too old and too layered to belong to anything human. They followed her like a second heartbeat, tugging at her every step. At first, she thought she was losing her mind, grief and loneliness shaping her imagination. But then the shadows themselves began to stir. Shapes crawled at the corners of her vision, slithering up the trunks of trees, curling over the earth like smoke made flesh. When she stilled, they stilled. When she moved, they trailed after her, loyal as hounds. It terrified her. It thrilled her. One night, as the blood moon waned, she woke to find them coiled around her sleep-in body, draped like a living cloak of darkness. A shiver of power hummed through her veins, sharp enough to leave her gasping. Something inside her wanted to surrender, to let them in fully, but the memory of the pack's disgust kept her rigid with fear. If they had despised her for failing to shift, what would they do if they saw this? The whispers pressed harder, overlapping until a single phrase cut through. Night-fying blood will not be silenced. Her breath hitched, because she knew that name. Night-fying was no myth. It was the bloodline blamed for war, cursed to destruction centuries ago. And yet, the shadows curling lovingly at her skin told her the impossible. The blood had survived. It had survived in her.
Driven by equal parts terror and hunger for answers, Lydia made her way back toward the ruins, on the far edge of Packlands. Few dared venture near them, remnants of a temple built in the age when wolves worshipped more than the moon. The stone arches were broken, moss devouring carved sigils, but the air buzzed with an old heaviness that made her teeth ache. She found the archive half collapsed beneath rubble, sealed in shadow. The whispers guided her, threads of voice pulling her hands to the right stones, the right cracks. She unearthed a chamber lined with faded tapestries and brittle scrolls, the remnants of a history her pack had tried to erase. The language was jagged and old, but she could read pieces, her blood translating what her mind could not. Each word clawed at her throat as though it belonged to her. There it was, the prophecy. When the blood moon births the shadow child, the wolf without form will rise. Rejected by pack, claimed by night, she will bring ruin or redemption to all who howl beneath the sky. Lydia's fingers trembled against the parchment. Her entire life she had been the cursed one, the broken one. But this prophecy painted her as the center of a war she never chose. The shadows thickened around her, curling into shapes that almost resembled wolves. She backed away, fear gnawing at her. Yet part of her was drawn forward. The prophecy promised destruction and power, but it also promised a choice. Her chest tightened as she shoved the scroll back, her breath ragged, because deep down she feared the answer more than the question. If the prophecy was true, would she bring salvation or be the very monster they had always claimed she was?
The next day, Lydia wandered the forest in a daze, the prophecy burning in her mind. She thought of destroying the scroll, of burying it so no one else could see what she had read. But the shadows pulsing beneath her skin wouldn't allow it. They hummed with agreement, as if her blood itself acknowledged the truth. She was the one the prophecy named, the shadow child born under a cursed moon. She wasn't alone for long. From the deeper wood emerged a figure she had seen only once before. A crone draped in furs, eyes milky with age yet sharp as wolf claws. The elder of the banished, some called her. Others whispered she was half witch, half wolf, too dangerous to live within the pack. Lydia froze as the woman's gaze swept over her like a blade. "I felt the stirrings," the elder rasped, her voice threaded with something that made Lydia's bones ache. "The night-fang blood awakens in you. You are not ready for its hunger." Lydia's lips parted in denial, but the shadows betrayed her, writhing up her arms in smoky coils. The elder's expression tightened, sorrow mixing with warning. That power will devour you unless you master it, and those who discover what you are will not hesitate to kill you before it takes root. Lydia's pulse quickened. She wanted to ask how to control it, how to survive what was rising inside her, but the elder only leaned closer, breath sharp with herbs and ash. Beware the ones who call themselves protectors. They will bind you, cage you, and bleed you dry. Trust no alpha's promise, not even the one whose eyes linger on you in secret. The shadows recoiled as if struck, and Lydia staggered back, her throat tight. She opened her mouth to demand more, but the elder melted into mist before her eyes, vanishing into the trees as if she had never been there at all. And in the silence that followed, Lydia's blood throbbed with dread, because the only alpha whose eyes had lingered on her since exile was the king himself.
That night, Lydia couldn't sleep. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves seemed heavier, closer, as though the forest itself conspired to watch her. She built a small fire, hoping its warmth might chase away the whispers, but the shadows danced in the flames, forming wolves with bared teeth. Her thoughts circled the elder's words, "Trust no alpha." And yet the Alpha King's gaze haunted her, steady and unreadable, a tether she could neither sever nor understand. She remembered his strength, the way his presence crushed entire rooms into silence. Was that dominance or something more? Drawn by restless energy, she walked to the riverbank. The moon hung low and silver, its light spilling across the water. Her reflection rippled with every step, but it wasn't entirely her own. The outline of a wolf flickered over her features, black smoke forming ears and eyes that glowed like coals. She staggered, heart hammering, as the image grinned back at her. She whispered, "What are you?" The water shivered as the shadow wolf within her bared its teeth, lips moving with words that echoed in her skull. "We are you. We are what they feared, what they tried to bury. You are the Night Fang reborn." Her knees hit the riverbank, cold mud soaking her skin as the truth sank deeper than bone. She wasn't cursed by accident. She was the continuation of something ancient and dreaded, a shadow wolf. The reflection shimmered again, this time showing her not alone, but surrounded by fire, wolves howling as they tore at each other, blood drenching the earth. At the center stood Lydia, her eyes black pits of shadow, her claws red with ruin. She gasped and jerked away from the water, heart pounding in terror. But when she looked up, someone was standing on the opposite bank, watching.
The Alpha King stood across the river, tall and silent, moonlight carving silver across his shoulders. Lydia's breath caught, her body locking as though her blood had already bowed to him. How long had he been there? How much had he seen? He didn't move, didn't speak. His gaze was fixed not on her, but on the smoke curling from her arms, shadows that hadn't yet realized they were exposed. She scrambled to smother them, but the darkness clung like a lover, refusing to be dismissed. The king's expression hardened. Finally, his voice broke the silence, low, measured, too calm. "It's true, then. The whispers weren't lies." Her chest tightened. "You don't understand." He stepped closer, the river parting at his command as his wolf power pulsed through the earth. The water stilled, the air itself bending beneath him. "I understand enough. You carry the blood of monsters, the Night Fang curse. Do you know what that means?" Tears burned her eyes. "I didn't ask for this." His jaw flexed, eyes golden with a mixture she couldn't name. Anger, fascination, fear. No one asks to be a weapon. He tilted his head, assessing her as though she were prey and salvation both. "The question is whether you'll wield yourself or let someone else do it for you." Lydia's lips parted, but before she could speak, a low growl rolled from the shadows behind her. She spun, every nerve alight with terror, as glowing eyes bloomed in the trees, one pair, then two, then a dozen. Wolves. Not of her pack, not of his. Enemies.
The rival pack emerged from the darkness, their fangs flashing under moonlight. Lydia's breath hitched as she stumbled backward, pressed between the river and a wall of snarling bodies. Their alpha stepped forward, his scarred muzzle curling into a grin. "The Shadow Child, the broken wolf. We've been waiting." Her skin prickled, every instinct screaming flight, but the shadows surged, answering the threat with a hunger she could not contain. They poured from her palms like liquid night, forming claws that sliced into the earth. The rival wolves faltered for a heartbeat, unnerved by what they saw. The king moved then, his own wolf tearing through his skin in a blur of light and bone. He hit the ground before her, in full form, massive and golden, growls shaking the earth. For the first time, Lydia saw the weight of his protection, but it wasn't enough to calm the terror rising in her chest. Because the shadows didn't just want to defend her, they wanted blood. Her body trembled as they pulled tighter, demanding release, snarling with her heartbeat. She felt herself slipping, losing control, the prophecy's words clawing in her mind, ruin or redemption. The rival alpha lunged, claws flashing. Lydia screamed, and the shadows answered for her, surging outward like a storm, swallowing him whole. When the night cleared, she stood panting, hands drenched in a darkness that hissed like fire. The rival alpha lay broken at her feet, the rest of his wolves backing away in horrified silence. Lydia lifted her gaze to the king, her chest heaving. His golden eyes met hers, but instead of triumph, there was a flicker of something colder. Fear.
The rival wolves scattered into the trees, leaving only silence and the smell of blood behind. Lydia's body shook with exhaustion, but the shadows still coiled thick around her like smoke, unwilling to disperse. She could feel their hunger gnawing at her ribs, a restless storm that whispered for more. The Alpha King stood across from her, massive in his shifted form, golden fur glowing under the moon. When his eyes met hers, she expected reassurance, perhaps even pride, but instead she saw hesitation, and beneath it, fear. He shifted back slowly, his skin slick with blood and moonlight, muscles rigid as if holding himself back from instinct. "You don't understand what you've done," he said, his voice like a blade kept carefully sheathed. "That power doesn't belong to wolves, it belongs to nightmares." His words cut deeper than any enemy's claws. She wanted to scream at him that she hadn't chosen this, that she was as terrified as he was. But the way he looked at her, as if she were both salvation and death, strangled the words in her throat. The shadows hissed at his presence, curling tighter, and Lydia had to fight not to double over beneath their pull. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. "It just happened." Her voice shook with a fragility she despised. His jaw tightened, a muscle ticking. "Intent won't matter when the packs learn what you are. They'll see the shadow wolf and march for your blood." He paused, eyes narrowing, golden light cutting through her. "And I will be forced to choose whether to protect you or destroy you first." The night pressed heavy between them, the fire of his dominance clashing against the chill of her shadows. Lydia's chest constricted, her heart torn between defiance and despair. She wanted to believe he wouldn't harm her, that something bound them deeper than fear. But as his gaze lingered on the darkness crawling across her skin, she realized she couldn't be sure. and when his fan finally reached out, fingers brushing her cheek with unexpected gentleness, she flinched, not from the touch, but from the truth curling in her blood. If the Alpha King feared her, then every wolf in their world would too.
The following days blurred into tension, every step shadowed by suspicion. The king kept her close, but his watchful gaze was not that of a protector. It was of a man guarding a weapon. Lydia felt the bond between them stretch taut, strung with a desire she didn't want to name and a mistrust that bled into every glance. Yet before she could make sense of it, another ghost from her past returned to shatter what little ground she had found. Lucas, the mate who had once scorned her, stood at the edge of camp, tall and unbending, his eyes cold but carrying something new, a flicker of guilt or perhaps desperation. The last time she had seen him, his rejection had carved her soul raw. Now he stared at her as though the rejection were a mistake he couldn't undo. The shadows inside her recoiled at the sight of him, a hiss threading her ribs, but her heart clenched all the same. Memories of what might have been, what she had once longed for, surged unwanted through her veins. "You're alive," Lucas said flatly, as though the words tasted bitter. His gaze shifted to the Alpha King, a challenge sparking between them that burned hotter than fire. And under his protection, no less. "Do you even know what he wants from you, Lydia? He doesn't keep broken wolves out of kindness. He claims what he can use." His voice sharpened, barbed with the cruelty she remembered too well, yet beneath the venom she caught it, the crack in his tone, the strain of regret. Lydia's throat tightened, torn between old wounds and present chains. The king's hand rested briefly on her shoulder, a gesture both protective and possessive, his golden gaze daring Lucas to push further. For a heartbeat, Lydia stood between them, one the ghost of love lost, the other the shadow of power unasked for. And as Lucas's eyes burned with something dangerously close to yearning, she realized that her betrayal had already begun, not of them, but of herself, because some part of her still wanted to believe in the man who had once thrown her away.
Lydia avoided Lucas for days, but his presence lingered in every corner of the camp like smoke that refused to clear. Each time their eyes met across the firelight, she saw the boy he had once been, the boy who had promised forever before shattering her with rejection. And each time she saw the Alpha King standing close, his gaze unreadable, she felt the sharp contrast between what she had lost and what she was being forced into. Lucas cornered her at the edge of the forest, his voice stripped raw. "I made a mistake, Lydia. I was afraid of what you couldn't do, afraid of what it meant for me. But seeing you now," he reached for her hand, and though the shadows hissed in protest, her heart betrayed her by aching toward the familiarity of his touch. His eyes softened, and for the briefest moment she glimpsed the mate who once whispered dreams against her skin. But the moment shattered with the king's arrival, golden dominance spilling through the trees like fire. His gaze fixed on their closeness, his jaw tight as stone. "She doesn't belong to you anymore," he said, voice low enough to rattle the earth. Lucas straightened, defiance flaring, and Lydia felt the weight of being the battlefield between them. Both men were wolves, both alpha by nature, yet only one had chosen to discard her when she was weakest. Her chest tightened as the shadows coiled tighter, restless with her turmoil. She pulled free from Lucas, stepping back, but her heart was already bleeding from the wound of being torn in two. And when the king's hand closed around her wrist, grounding and possessive all at once, she knew her choice would damn her either way, because in the eyes of wolves, to belong to one alpha was to betray the other.
That night, silence pressed between Lydia and the king like a wall. He had said nothing of Lucas's boldness, but his watch grew sharper, his nearness heavier, as if guarding her from even her own thoughts. She wanted to scream at him for caging her with invisible chains, but when he finally spoke, his words stole her breath. "I should have killed him," the king murmured, his gaze fixed on the fire. "But I didn't, because of you." His eyes lifted, golden and burning, and she felt the truth like heat across her skin. "You think I claim you out of power, Lydia, but the truth is worse. I cannot let you go, not because of the shadows, not because of the prophecy, because somewhere between fearing you and needing you, I began to want you." Her breath faltered. The shadows stirred uneasily, sensing the shift in his tone, the tremor of something more dangerous than dominance, desire. She shook her head, refusing to let the words sink in. "You don't want me. You want control. You want to cage the monster before she breaks free." His jaw tightened, but his hand lifted, brushing her cheek with startling gentleness. "You are not a monster," he said, softer than she thought him capable of. And for a moment, she wanted to believe him, wanted to lean into the heat of his palm and forget every wound Lucas had carved into her heart. But belief was dangerous, because when his lips hovered close enough to steal the breath from hers, the shadows surged violently, hissing against the bond, as though even they knew that surrendering to him would cost her something she could never reclaim.
The camp woke to chaos at dawn. Wolves snarled at the borders, and when Lydia stumbled from her tent, she saw them. Scouts from her old pack, the ones who had cast her out. Their alpha stood among them, eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. "You thought we wouldn't find you, Shadow Child?" he sneered. "You thought exile freed you from our judgment?" The king shifted beside her, his dominance slamming into the intruders, but the old alpha only smirked. "You claim her, king? Then know this, she is cursed. She carries the blood that will end us all. She is no mate, she is death wearing flesh." His words struck like claws, and murmurs rippled through both packs, doubt bleeding into every ear. Lydia's chest heaved as the whispers spread. The prophecy, her secret, the thing she had feared most was now laid bare before all. She tried to speak, to deny or defend, but the shadows betrayed her, curling up her arms in black smoke, undeniable proof of the elder's warning. Gasps and growls filled the air as wolves stepped back in horror, as though she were plague. The king growled, stepping in front of her, but the damage was done. The world now saw her not as wolf, not as mate, but as weapon. And as the old alpha's eyes glinted with triumph, Lydia's heart broke with a truth sharper than claws. No matter who stood beside her, she would always be alone in their eyes.
That night, Lydia sat alone at the edge of camp, her body trembling as though the whispers in her blood had become claws raking her soul. Every glance she caught from the pack carried suspicion. Every breath she drew carried the taste of exile all over again. She had been rejected once. Now she was rejected twice by the world itself. The king approached quietly, his steps heavy with the weight of battles yet to come. "They won't understand you," he admitted, his voice stripped of command. "Maybe they never will. But I will stand between you and their fear as long as you let me." His hand hovered, not quite touching, offering instead of claiming. And for the first time, Lydia glimpsed not a ruler, but a man torn between duty and something far more fragile. Her chest ached. Lucas's shadow lingered in her thoughts, his regret twisting alongside the king's confession. Betrayal cut both ways, her old mate who had thrown her away, and her new bond pulling her toward a love she feared would consume her. She wanted to choose neither, wanted to claim herself, but the world had never granted her that freedom.
Wolves belonged to someone, always. When the king finally touched her hand, warmth seared through her veins, colliding with the cold hunger of her shadows. For one dizzying heartbeat, she thought maybe she could hold both, the light of his promise and the darkness of her curse. But then the shadows flared violently, choking her breath, and she collapsed forward with a strangled cry. And as the king caught her, his arms strong but his voice breaking with her name, Lydia knew the shadows were no longer content to whisper. They wanted to rule.
The fever broke like fire. For hours, Lydia drifted in and out of consciousness, her body racked by tremors as the shadows surged through her veins, demanding release. When she woke fully, the camp was silent. Every wolf standing at a wary distance, eyes filled with awe and fear. The air itself seemed to bend around her, dark smoke curling from her skin like a living storm. Her breath came ragged, but her senses were sharper than ever. She could hear the thrum of every heartbeat around her, smell the tangled knot of fear in their lungs, and beneath it all, a pulse she had never felt before. Her wolf. Not the shifting that had failed her under the moon, but something older, deeper. A beast woven from shadow and bone. She had not been broken. She had been different all along. The king approached cautiously, his golden gaze unyielding, but even he hesitated before her new form. "Lydia," he murmured, the sound more prayer than name. The shadows responded, spiraling higher, stretching into the shape of a wolf so massive it blotted out the moonlight. Her chest clenched as realization cut through her terror. She was not cursed. She was the shadow wolf, the one spoken of in whispers, the harbinger of change, feared for centuries as the creature that would end the balance of the packs. A gasp broke from her lips, and the wolf of shadow howled through her, shaking the earth. Wolves cowered, some baring throats in instinctive submission, others retreating as though she carried death itself. And as the sound faded into the night, Lydia sank to her knees, her heart pounding with one truth she could no longer deny. There was no going back. The revelation spread faster than fire in dry grass. By dawn, every scout carried the same story back to their packs. The cursed Omega had become the shadow wolf. And by midday, alliances began to fracture. Some feared her, demanding her death before she could fulfill the prophecy. Others whispered of using her as a weapon, a tool to tip the balance of power. None saw her as a woman. None saw her as Lydia. The king gathered his warriors, their loyalty tested as doubt coiled in their eyes. "She is under my protection," he declared, his voice thundering through the clearing. "Any who raise claw against her will answer to me." His command silenced them, but silence was not unity. She could feel their mistrust in every sideways glance, every hurried whisper. Even those who had once defended her now struggled to look at her without flinching. Lucas appeared again, desperation etched deep in his face. "Come with me," he urged when he caught her alone. "Before the packs unite against you. You can't trust him to shield you forever." His words clawed at her chest, but the shadows pulsed violently at his nearness, as though remembering his betrayal and warning her of the danger still lingering in his touch. She turned away, throat tight, but it didn't matter. War was already stirring, and she was the spark that would set it alight. As the first horns of battle sounded in the distance, Lydia lifted her gaze to the horizon and saw the truth written in smoke and blood. The werewolf world had chosen its enemy, and it was her.
The council fire burned high, shadows leaping like wild things against the night sky. Alphas from neighboring packs gathered, their voices colliding in heated argument. Some demanded Lydia's immediate execution, calling her the end of their kind. Others, hungrier for power, argued to bind her, to wield her as a weapon against rivals. Lydia stood at the center of it all, a living fracture line splitting their fragile unity apart. Every word cut deeper than the last. They spoke of her as though she weren't standing there, as if she were no more than a tool or a threat. The Alpha King's presence alone kept their claws sheathed, his golden stare daring anyone to cross her. Yet even he couldn't silence the fear. Fear had roots deeper than loyalty, and she could feel it twisting through the assembly like a vine strangling its host. Her chest ached as memories of her first rejection returned. How familiar it felt to stand unwanted, unloved, defined only by what she lacked or threatened. Yet this time, the stakes were not her heart, but the world she lived in. She could not run from their judgment, nor beg for their acceptance. For the first time, she understood the shadows within her didn't care for belonging. They demanded survival. And when one alpha lunged, testing the king's promise, Lydia didn't think, she moved. The shadows tore free, her wolf surging into the air, swallowing the attacker in a cloak of darkness so absolute that when it lifted, he lay trembling, broken, his throat bared in submission. Silence followed, the fire cracking loud in the stunned night until it became clear to every wolf present she was not theirs to command. For days after the council, tension thickened like storm clouds. The king shielded her from open assault, but something had shifted in his gaze. Whereas once there had been a fragile thread of trust, now there was distance, calculation, as though he weighed her worth against the danger she posed. It was a look she recognized too well, and it hollowed her to the bone. She confronted him beneath the ancient oaks, their branches clawing the starlight sky. "Tell me the truth," she demanded. "Do you protect me because of me or because of what I am?" His jaw clenched, his silence heavier than any denial. Finally, his words came low but sharp enough to bleed. "I can't separate the two anymore." The shadows stirred violently at his confession, her heart splintering with the weight of betrayal. She had dared to believe he saw her, not just the beast inside her. Now the truth pressed against her like iron chains. She wasn't a woman to him, she was a prophecy, a weapon he both needed and feared. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Then you're no different than the rest." His hand twitched as if he wanted to reach for her, but he didn't. And as she turned away, the shadows surged higher, wrapping her in a darkness that matched the storm building in her chest, whispering that trust was an illusion she could no longer afford.
The first attack came at dusk. Wolves from rival packs poured through the trees, their howls splitting the fading light. Lydia barely had time to draw breath before the clash erupted. Claws tearing, teeth snapping, blood sprang across the forest floor. Her shadows rose instinctively, weaving barriers, striking back with the violence that shocked even her. She moved through the chaos like a storm, shadows lashing out to shield those at her side, then striking with lethal force against enemies who dared approach. But the battlefield was a blur of friend and foe, and every strike she made only deepened the horror painted in the eyes around her. Wolves she had once shared meals with now flinched from her touch, terrified of the power she couldn't control. The king fought beside her, a golden blaze in the dark, but even his fury couldn't hold the tide. They were outnumbered, ambushed, hunted by packs united not by loyalty, but by fear of her existence. Lydia's chest heaved, her body burning with exhaustion, yet the shadows demanded more, always more, dragging her toward a place where instinct devoured humanity. And in the blur of blood and smoke, she saw him, Lucas, leading part of the assault, his eyes wild with desperation. For a heartbeat, their gazes locked, and she understood. He hadn't come to protect her. He had come to end her. The forest blazed with fire, the night lit in violent shades of red and gold. The first bottle had only been a spark, and now the war spread in waves, pulling every pack into its flames. Lydia stood at the heart of it, the shadow wolf whose existence demanded sides be chosen, loyalty pledged or severed. There was no neutrality left. Her body shook with the weight of countless eyes upon her. To some, she was salvation, the weapon to end their rivals. To others, she was death incarnate, the end of everything sacred. The duality tore her apart, each step sinking her deeper into a destiny she never wanted. Yet the shadows inside her reveled, hungering for the chaos, feeding on the fear she left in her wake. The king gathered his strongest warriors, his voice thunderous as he declared open war against those who threatened her. But Lydia saw what he didn't, the fractures in his ranks, the wolves who hesitated, who whispered of abandoning him to save themselves. Unity was crumbling, and with it the fragile hope she had clung to. When the moon broke free from the clouds, full and bright, Lydia's wolf rose with it, shadows howling into the sky. And as the sound rolled across the battlefield, packs turned, eyes wide with terror and awe, realizing the truth too late. The war they had feared had already begun, and it was her very existence that had set it ablaze.
The night was split in two, half wreathed in shadow, half drenched in the crimson glow of the blood moon. Lydia stood on the ridge overlooking the battlefield, her chest heaving as the last echoes of the war drums faded into the stillness. The earth below was scarred by fire and blood, bodies strewn across the soil like forgotten offerings. Yet the silence that followed was not peace. It was the breath before annihilation. The blood moon's light struck her like a brand, igniting every vein, every nerve, until her body trembled with unbearable power. The shadows surged higher, darker, sharper, shifting into wings, claws, and teeth made of pure night. She could feel her wolf rising within her at last, no longer fractured, no longer denied, but bound to the very marrow of her soul. It was intoxicating, terrifying, and utterly unstoppable. Below, wolves gathered in fractured packs, their howls carrying both devotion and terror. Some bent their knees, foreheads pressed into the dirt, voices crying out for her as their queen. Others spat curses, vowing death before they would submit to a creature born of both wolf and shadow. The blood moon had drawn the final line, and Lydia was the choice, standing between survival and destruction. Her heart thundered as she felt every gaze on her, every bond trembling at the weight of her power. She had dreamed of belonging once, of being accepted for who she was. Now she realized she could never return to the girl who had stood trembling under the moon, begging to shift. The shadows whispered of empire, of dominion, of remaking the world in her image. And as the king's voice rose below, calling her name in warning, she spread her hands wide to the sky, the blood moon crowning her in fire and night, knowing that whatever path she chose next would decide the fate of them all. The Alpha King broke through the line of warriors, his golden aura blazing like a second sun against the crimson moon. His body bore the scars of battle, his breaths ragged, but his gaze never wavered as it locked on her. For a heartbeat, Lydia thought he might strike, that fear had finally pushed him past hesitation, but instead he fell to one knee, not in submission, but in desperate appeal. Lydia, do not let this power consume you. You are more than prophecy, more than curse. You are flesh and soul, heart and choice. His words struck deeper than claws ever could, peeling back the armor she had built. He was not addressing the shadow wolf.
He was speaking to the girl who had once been rejected, who had once wept for the family she never had. Her chest tightened, the shadows recoiling at his plea as though burned by it. They whispered to her of betrayal, reminding her of the doubt in his eyes, the calculation in his silence. Yet part of her clung to the warmth in his voice, to the fragile thread of hope that perhaps she was not doomed to be weapon or monster. The world below waited, packs holding their breath for her verdict, their claws poised for either war or surrender. Lucas appeared from the chaos, his eyes wild, his voice cutting through the tension. He lies. He fears you as much as the rest. Join me, Lydia. We can take this world together. Two voices, two paths, and the blood moon roared above, demanding her decision. Her power trembled on the edge of release, shadows clawing at the earth, and as the ground split beneath her feet, she realized she might not have the luxury of choosing at all.
The ground split wider, roots tearing free as if the earth itself rejected the clash of destinies above it. Lydia staggered, shadows writhing from her skin in great tendrils that lashed at the sky, twisting into monstrous forms before collapsing back into smoke. The blood moon burned hotter, a red fire in her veins, and with every heartbeat, she felt less like herself and more like the prophecy they all feared. The king rose to his feet, golden light blazing, his wolf straining against his control. "Fight it!" he bellowed, stepping closer, his presence fierce enough to push back the shadows for a moment. But his strength could not reach the hollow ache deep inside her chest, the wound left by years of rejection, loneliness, and betrayal. The shadows fed on that emptiness, whispering promises of power so absolute no one could hurt her again. The packs watched in paralyzed awe, their loyalties snapping like brittle twigs. Some dropped to their knees, chanting her name as though she were already their sovereign. Others fled into the woods, tails tucked, knowing they could not fight a creature born of night and moonfire. Lydia's heart pounded as the shadows shaped themselves into a towering wolf, a beast more massive than any alpha, a dark crown settling over her shoulders. Her gaze swept over them all, king, Lucas, pack, enemy, and she felt the decision harden inside her bones. But before she could claim it, the shadows surged violently, seizing control, forcing her body forward. Her lips parted in a howl that wasn't entirely her own, and the sound shattered the night like glass, turning even allies pale with terror as they realized she was slipping beyond her own will. The howl echoed long after her mouth had closed, reverberating through the bones of every wolf in the clearing. Lydia's vision burned red, her senses drowning in a tide of hunger and rage not entirely her own. The shadows pressed harder, wrapping tighter, whispering that surrender was freedom, that as she gave herself fully, the pain of rejection and fear would finally end. All she had to do was let go. The king lunged not in attack, but in desperation, seizing her wrist with a grip that burned against the cold of her shadows. "Lydia," his voice cracked through the storm, "you are not the curse, you are the choice." For a heartbeat, the words pierced the darkness, reminding her of laughter she thought she'd forgotten, of warmth she once believed she'd never feel again. Her chest heaved, caught between that fragile memory and the abyss calling her name. But then Lucas's voice cut through, sharp and venomous. "He's lying to you. Look at them. Every pack here would rather see you dead than free. Stop fighting the truth. Take what is yours and they will bow." His words dripped with the poison of her deepest fears, and the shadows writhed in agreement, pulling her closer to their grasp. She stood trembling between them, her body the battlefield of two futures, neither promising peace. Her knees buckled,
the moonlight searing her skin, the shadows clawing deeper. She screamed, a sound torn between agony and defiance, as the ground split further beneath her. And when she opened her eyes again, her reflection in the king's gaze was no longer her own. It was the wolf of shadows, fangs bared, crown of night blazing.
The blood moon pulsed like a living heart above, its crimson glow soaking into Lydia's skin until she felt every bone sing with raw power. The battlefield had fallen into silence, every wolf holding its breath as she swayed between surrender and salvation. The shadows pressed their will into her chest, flooding her veins with the promise of dominion. "Why fight what you are?" they whispered. "Why beg for love when you could command it?" The king's golden aura still cut through the storm, unwavering even as sweat streaked his brow and blood matted his chest. His eyes, fierce yet pleading, never left hers. "You are not theirs to define. You are not mine to own. You are yours, Lydia. Decide for yourself." The words rang with a dangerous truth. If she chose mercy, she would carry the burden of mistrust forever. If she chose war, she would lose the last threads of herself. Lucas stepped closer, his voice rising with fervor. "Do you hear them? They already worship you. You could tear down every throne, every pack, and rise above them all. Why lower yourself for a man who will turn on you the moment fear outweighs his love?" His hand reached out, trembling with both desperation and greed. And for a heartbeat, she saw the echo of the mate she once longed for, before rejection twisted her soul raw. The shadows surged eagerly toward Lucas's outstretched palm, feeding on his ambition, drawing her closer to ruin. But her chest clenched, and in that moment she realized the cruelest truth. Neither path offered safety. To follow Lucas was to drown in conquest. To trust the king was to risk another betrayal. And yet to do nothing was to let the shadows consume her entirely. The world waited breathless as Lydia lifted her head beneath the blood moon, her choice coalescing in the blaze of her shadow wolf's eyes. The night bled into eternity as Lydia raised her arms, shadows twisting into tendrils that coiled across the broken field like serpents seeking prey. The air pulsed with primal energy, every wolf forced to bow, not by loyalty, but by sheer suffocating power. The blood moon crowned her in a mantle of darkness, the mark of the shadow wolf blazing across her skin as if seared by fate itself. The whispers of the ancients roared inside her skull, demanding she finish what destiny had carved: conquer, reign, annihilate. Her shadow loomed monstrous against the earth, towering over the king's golden light as though to snuff it out completely. Yet he did not move, did not cower. He only stepped forward, voice steady though his body trembled. "Power without love is ash, and love without power is chains. Only you can bind them together, Lydia. Choose the wolf you want to be." His words trembled the edges of her fury, stirring the buried heartbeat of the girl who once longed simply to belong. Lucas, wild-eyed, dropped to his knees, arms open as if in worship. "Take it all! Take Lydia, and the world will burn at our command!" The shadows surged at his call, hungry to merge with her soul, to crown her not as queen, but as executioner of every law that bound the werewolf world. For a moment, her claws twitched toward him, the intoxicating vision of absolute dominion flooding her mind. Empires falling, packs kneeling, eternity soaked in obedience and fear. But then, her gaze found the king, bloodied yet unyielding, his light flickering but not extinguished, and in that fragile glow, she saw something the shadows could never give: choice, not compulsion. With a guttural roar, she turned, ripping the power from Lucas's grasp and searing it into her own, forging a balance between shadow and light that split the very heavens. Wolves fell prostrate, some in worship, others in terror, as Lydia ascended, not as a tyrant, not as a pawn, but as something no prophecy had ever dared to name. And yet, as the blood moon dimmed, a chill settled through her bones, for she knew this power had not ended the war. It had only changed its battlefield.
And that was only the beginning of Lydia's legend. If her journey gripped your heart, don't let it end here. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next story, leave a like to show you loved the story and your support, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think about Lydia's fate. Until next time, stay with us and step back into the shadows when the moon calls again.